Mr. Makarand Paranjape is an Indian academic, novelist, and a renowned poet. Mr. Paranjape has been professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. He is the former director of Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla. Mr. Paranjape is also a prolific author of numerous bestsellers. Mr. Paranjape, you are incredibly welcome to the conference. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Seema Singh, Mr. Pujari, and all the other participants. Thank you for this opportunity. I had the chance to listen in yesterday on YouTube Live and even day before, intermittently, and I think that this has been a very rich sharing on a topic of great importance. Initially, if you look at the idea of law and spirituality, it's not clear what the connection is, what the interconnection is. But one of the things that this conference very clearly illustrates is that in a spiritualized society, I think the lawlessness will reduce because people will not really want to break laws. And there will be some fundamental understanding of the nature and of life on earth, which is actually very interdependent. So if you take the Advaitic proposition of non-duality, then the self-other distinction is questioned. In other words, all of you listening to this very conference will not be seen as entirely different or apart from me who's speaking. In other words, our individualities are premised on a foundation of consciousness. Now, there are different versions of this in religious traditions around the world, which I can come to in a moment. But the real question is this. The question is, if we do not see other people as separate from us, then there is no need to torture them, take whatever doesn't belong to us, which is actually theirs, murder, rape, all of these heinous crimes which humanity has been prone to since the beginning of civilization. Some of these crimes will cease because there'll be no sense of seeing other people as separate from you. If you look around the world, there's so much violence, including climate violence, because we do violence to the planet also, which is our habitat. To be spiritually enlightened, to be spiritually awakened, would change our fundamental attitudes to ourselves, to other life around us, to other human beings, to social, in other words, human society, and finally to nature. And maybe if you reach that level, we'll understand the realm of the gods as well. So the real point I'm trying to make is that when we go deep into the topic, we realize that a completely spiritually awakened populace will obviate the need for the kind of legal system which we have today, which most of us will agree doesn't really work well. Let me give you some examples. Some weeks ago, Justice N.V. Ramana of our Supreme Court, he's the CJI, as we all know, the Chief Justice of India, and he talked about the pendency in Indian courts. And he said that the figure of 4.5 crores, that is 45 million cases, is somewhat exaggerated. The figures of pendency are available in the National Judicial Data Grid, and the Supreme Court itself, and the Supreme Court, and at present, there are 3.9 crore, that is almost 40 million cases pending in the district and subordinate courts. There are another 58.5 lakh cases in various high courts, and more than 69,000 cases in the Supreme Court itself, okay? So the figure is pretty much close to 4.5 crores or 45 million or even more than that. We also know about the famous dictum, justice delayed is justice denied. Today what we see is there are justice or whatever passes for justice is seen in litigation which involves you in endless botheration, you know. There's a wonderful book by Dr. Arun Shourie called Anita Gets Bail. I would recommend it to all legal students. And I'll just tell you the beginning of the book, the rest you can make out. One fine day, there's a knock at his door. It's not the dreaded midnight knock that we associate with communist regimes, but it's a mid-afternoon knock, and a posse of police people arrive at his residence and ask him, say, "Sir, is there somebody called Mrs. Anita Shourie in this home?" So he says, "Yes, there is. She's my wife. Sir, उनके खिलाफ अरेस्ट वारंट लेके हम आए हैं." तो उन्होंने कहा, "क्या मतलब अरेस्ट वारंट क्यों है?" उन्होंने कहा, "बहुत सारे समन्स भेजे गए मगर कोई जवाब नहीं आया और कोई कोर्ट में हाजिर नहीं हुआ, इसलिए मजबूरन हम उनके लिए वारंट लेके आए हैं, उनको पेश किया जाए." So Mr. Shourie said, "Oh, she's not very well. She's upstairs. She has Parkinson's disease. Can I know what the charge is?" Let's not forget that he was union minister in the Vajpayee cabinet, a very distinguished editor and writer, editor of Indian Express. He brought down governments. If you remember, Abdul Rahman Antule's government was brought down by Arun Shourie. He was disinvestment minister. So he's not an ordinary person we are talking about, right? I'll give you many such examples. But so what happens? He says, "What is the charge?" And he's an educated person with a PhD from Syracuse. So naturally he asks, like, "What is the charge?" Right? So he says, "Aapne Aravali ke notified forest land में एक मकान बनाया है." So he says, "हम मकान कैसे बना सकते जब हमारे पास plot ही नहीं है?" You please read the book because it goes into many aspects of our current legal situation in India. And, it reminded me of a famous novel by Kafka. I don't know if you've heard of Kafka. He was a great writer, a Jewish writer who wrote in German, but lived in a ghetto in Czechoslovakia, in what used to be Czechoslovakia, in Prague. And he's written a novel called, since I'm a student of literature and a teacher of literature, my PhD is also in literature. So I can't help giving some examples of law and literature in my talk. So Kafka's famous novel is called The Trial. And in it, the narrator, or rather the protagonist, is being tried for a crime he doesn't know of. And in the end, he's sentenced to death. Okay, and you must read this book because it's a legal dystopia, if ever there was one. And the red tape and the complications of the law are satirized in this novel, but it's almost an existential crisis that is being pointed out in that novel. I can recommend a few other books. One by Charles Dickens called, there are many novels of Charles Dickens which deal with the law, but one particular novel that I would recommend is called Bleak House. So Bleak House is about a litigation which goes on for years and years, and it's about the property rights, the ownership of a house, of an estate. And finally, the judgment comes in the chancery courts, and people who come out of the court, including the lawyers, the solicitors representing both sides, they throw up a sheaf of papers in the air, and everybody laughs. So what's the joke? The entire estate has been consumed in the costs of the litigation. So please look at those novels. In fact, in the last few months, for some reason, I've been invited to lecture at law universities. And one of the vice chancellors invited me to teach a course on law and literature. It's very tempting. One day I might do it. I would also recommend Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, of course, where the whole case there. I won't go into it, and how Portia, a lady disguised as a man, as a lawyer, saves Antonio. But these are books which question or which invite us to interrogate the legal systems of the land. I would recommend one more work for you, Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau. So Thoreau spent a night in jail because he refused to pay taxes. And he wrote this wonderful essay called Civil Disobedience, which Gandhi read many times and used as the foundation of his own civil disobedience campaign in Satyagraha. So the basic argument in civil disobedience is that there is a law that is higher than man-made law, which is natural law. This is where I'm coming to the topic again of law and spirituality. Man-made or human law is not perfect because human beings are not perfect. Today, there's a debate over Sharia law, and it's actually being imposed in Afghanistan even as we speak. But the whole idea of the Sharia was, put together more than 100 years after the Prophet's demise. And there are 4 schools, as you know, of Islamic jurisprudence. The point I'm trying to make is that human laws can be subject to modification with time, as our own laws are. So if you have a law where you have to cut off somebody's hand, maybe that was okay for stealing, that is. Maybe that was okay at a particular time in history. But to consider it immutable, permanent, is in conflict with a bigger law, which is natural law or even divine law. Okay, this is the point that Thoreau is making. You can say the same thing about flogging as a punishment or stoning to death as a punishment for adultery. In fact, in the Bible, there's a famous passage when Jesus intervenes when a woman is being stoned for adultery. And he says, let the person who has no sin cast the first stone. And everybody disperses because everyone is a sinner. So I'm mentioning examples from different traditions in order for us to broaden the scope of our discussion today. So the point that Thoreau is making is that human laws are not perfect. So they have to be measured against higher laws. And if human laws are found wanting when measured against higher laws, you can disobey those laws in order to change them. You can protest against them, which is what Gandhiji also did. In fact, most of our major freedom fighters were lawyers, and many of them were barristers at law. Gandhiji, Jawaharlal Nehru, Jinnah, Dr. Ambedkar, they were all lawyers. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, even Savarkar attended the inns of court, but did not graduate. He did not become a barrister because he was already a marked man as somebody who was rebelling against the British Empire. But later on, you have a whole litany of people. MC Chagla, an education minister. He was actually Jinnah's junior, but he went against the idea of the two-nation theory. So what I'm trying to say is many of the people who are members of our, or leaders of our freedom movement, Chittaranjan Das, who defended Sri Aurobindo in the famous Alipur blast trial, is another example. And Subhash Chandra Bose's brother was an important lawyer. So the point is that these were all lawyers. These were all legal luminaries of their time. And most of them were actually jailed by British laws, as was Bhagat Singh, who was hanged. All those who resisted the British Empire were sent to Andamans or Mandalay, as Tilak was, and Tilak died in jail. Subhash Chandra Bose lost 20 kilos when he was sent to Mandalay jail. He had malaria, he was really ill. So I'm saying these were lawyers and they broke the laws because the laws were unjust. So the point I'm trying to make is that the reason we need to talk about law and spirituality is because human laws can be deeply flawed, and our own legal system, as I mentioned, is a legacy of the British. You all know that the Indian Penal Code was drafted on the recommendations of the first Law Commission of India, which was established in 1834, under the Charter Act of 1833. And if this was a live class, I would have asked, who was the chairman of the Law Commission of India? I don't know if anybody wants to answer that question. You can unmute and answer. Who was the chairman of the Law Commission of India, which was established in 1834? Can anybody answer? This is for students, not for teachers. Would anybody want to answer? Please unmute and answer. Sunday morning, it's a bit early for you, huh?
I guess it is Machiavelli.
Yes, very good. Who was it that answered?
So Vijay.
Thank you, Vijayji. It was Thomas Babington Macaulay who also wrote the infamous Minute, which said that a single shelf of a European library was worth the entire literature of India and Arabia. So anyhow, this came into force in 1862 because it was put through a lot of, scrutiny, and more or less, the IPC is still based on that penal code which was drafted by our colonial masters. And even today, I'm told that it's a very robust IPC. Though we keep talking about certain articles we want to change with the times, we've changed articles about LGBT rights and so forth, which is the way it should be. But we are still following the British law and the criminal procedure. And don't also forget that the first hanging in India was that of a very famous person called Raja Nandakumar. And it was considered a miscarriage of justice, which led to the impeachment of the Chief Justice of the Indian Supreme Court. So it was a judicial murder, so to speak. So the point is, we have inherited the Indian Penal Code from our colonial masters, whose laws our own freedom leaders of our freedom struggle, often defied and broke and went to jail for. And some of those laws still persist in India, including laws on sedition, and several other such laws, Makoka, these are Rowlatt Act types of regulations. The state can imprison any of us and hold us for almost any length of time without bail. Today, the case of a very famous minister, a cabinet minister who has been arrested for saying that he would slap a chief minister, For saying that, he has been arrested. He spent a night in jail. So this is our legal system, right? Now, and we all understand from top to bottom, you must have heard all sorts of, concerns about the collegium as well. I remember one of our famous lawyers saying, if in the collegium system, why hasn't a single professor of law been appointed directly to the Supreme Court? Why is there so much cronyism, or whatever you want to call it, going on? And the lower judiciary, please look around. I've been told reliably that, I don't want to use certain words here out of deep respect and regard for our judiciary, which is still the last bastion of democracy, it would seem. Even then, it's not a system that seems to work well, as I mentioned, citing a famous book, Anita Gets Bail, okay? So now I have about 7 minutes left. I want to try to wind up. So what is the relationship between law and spirituality? And first of all, you might ask, what is spirituality? The word spirituality comes from the word spiritus. It's a Latin word, as is the word law. Law comes from Latin, use, justice, and lexis. So law is something that's written down. Whereas in India, we have traditional practices. Even today, disputes are sorted out without recourse to law. But we are getting increasingly litigious. And Gandhiji realized this. In 1909, he wrote a book called Hind Swaraj. And he made a critique of lawyers in our legal system. Please read it. So the point is that given the pendency in Indian courts, and given the fact that there are very few courts per person in India compared to developed countries, we cannot expect the law to solve our problems. And this Gandhiji realized. So in Hind Swaraj, he said that his idea of an ideal society was a highly advanced populace, citizenry which was responsible. And even today, you have one police thana for several villages, and you have two or three policemen who have a bicycle and a stick. So, in other words, Indian society is a dharmic society. It's not a legal society. And that's why we say pran jaya par vachan na jaya. That is the essence of Indian spirituality. You know, satyam vada dharmam chara. So when you are truthful and you follow dharma, you hardly need the law. And today, any law-abiding citizen, when a policeman approaches him, he's afraid that he's coming to ask him for something. You know, this is how our legal system and our law enforcement has got a bad name, and there's so much lack of trust because of the politicization in the system. So a dharmic society does not need a law, a huge apparatus, expensive apparatus of law. And this is what spirituality and law, the connection is. A highly evolved, a highly dharmic society does not require a huge judicial system. It doesn't mean that law will cease to be. There is a modern sector of our society where law is essential. Obviously, you need it. But for 80, 90, even 95% of the people, if you follow dharma, then you don't need these man-made laws so much because you don't want to do harm to anybody else. This is in all traditions, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Or what Confucius said, do not do to others what you do not want them to do to you. So don't torture somebody because you don't want them to torture you. And Buddhism says all life is sentient, right? You feel pain, even an ant feels pain. Even a chicken feels pain. Everybody feels pain. So ahimsa paramo dharma, as the Mahabharata says and as the Manusmriti says, means that do not hurt other people. Pure ahimsa is not possible because life feeds on life. But the intention to hurt others, that we can renounce. So what is the meaning of spirituality? I would say that, as I said, the word comes from spiritus. It means, in Latin, it means breath, but it means like prana. It means the non-corporeal aspect of who you are. Non-corporeal means that we are not merely the body. Most spiritual traditions will say that. And the essence of spirituality is to say, I'm not just the body. Of course, the body is mine, but I'm consciousness. And consciousness is infinite. It has no beginning and no end. And so we are infinite. That is what spirituality tries to say. And you can look at it from another point of view. Previous speakers have spoken about this, so I don't have to explain it at length. But if you took the Purusharthas and you see Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. So Dharma and Moksha are spirituality. Kama and Artha are all the Vyavaharika, the practical things of life, including law, making money, running for elections, governing. So Dharma itself is sufficient for most of us. What is Dharma? Look at the yamas of the Yoga Sutras. That itself is enough. Satya, Ahimsa, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, and Asateya. Asateya, Aparigraha. This is the essence of spirituality. Satya is all pervading and fully sufficient. If you follow truth, it's said to be the best path for Kali Yuga, even for lawyers, by the way. So Satya, Ahimsa, I already mentioned. Brahmacharya doesn't only mean chastity, but it means going into the vastness of your true self. Asateya, non-stealing. Aparigraha, non-hoarding. This is the essence of spirituality. Just imagine if out of 7.9 billion people on the planet, even if 1 billion followed it, wouldn't the world be a completely different kind of place than it is today? So I see the relationship between law and spirituality as follows. If you spiritualize society, it would also spiritualize law and the legal profession. And that would reduce crime, lawlessness, violence, and in fact, it will reduce the need for litigation. So I think that what we have to go towards, given that our legal system is overburdened and given the extent of pendency, I think the argument is instead of litigation, go towards arbitration. Instead of arbitration, go towards mediation. Instead of mediation, go towards discussion. Instead of discussion, go towards spirituality and sort out all your problems, without going to legal recourse. Having said this, though, I want to end on, a biography of Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, which I read recently. I'm saying it because apparently ISKCON is one of the co-sponsors of this conference. He was a supremely practical man. You must read the history of the Juhu temple. The land was sold by a man called Mr. A.B. Nair, who was a very powerful man at that time. He edited a major newspaper. But anyhow, the point is, Prabhupada said, let's go to court. Let's take them to court because our cause is just and Krishna will help us. So I want to end with the paradox of this topic, law and spirituality. On the one hand, you can say, as Jesus said, give unto Caesar what is due to Caesar. In other words, these are two realms which are entirely separate. They belong to two different dimensions of life, right? In other words, law belongs to the Vyavaharika, aspect of life, the practical aspect of life, for which you should read the Panchatantra. And spirituality belongs to the Adhyatmika aspect of life, for which you have to read the Upanishads, right? So there is the strong position that separates the two, and then there's a position that says the two overlap. And I will take an intermediate position. I believe they're interconnected, and you need both. You need the Vyavaharika, otherwise you will not succeed in the world. But mere success in the world does not give you true happiness. So you need Adhyatmika as well. So I think it is by combining law and spirituality, or by combining dharma and moksha on one side, and artha and kama on the other side. By combining these two, you can have human flourishing. And in this civilization, we have always believed in creating the conditions for human flourishing. And that is why I'll end with Sri Aurobindo. He gave a five-fold integral yoga in which the physical, the vital, the mental, the psychic, and spiritual have to be integrated for divine life on earth, for the full flourishing and awakening of human potential. With these words, I'm out of time. Thank you all very much. Thank you. And good luck in your quest.